My name is Christoph Sauerwein. I am the academic director of iCAAD. It's a tough session, a poignant session, hiding in plain sight. What is hiding in plain sight? Human trafficking. I never thought that would be in my life when I grew up. And now every other day I read about it, I hear about it. What scares me most? Hiding in plain sight. The truth is that we're on the receiving end here. We receive people being trafficked in the Western world. What are we left with? Detecting, intervening, helping. It's a human duty, far beyond law enforcement, I think. What are we looking at? 21 million people, minimal. It's the size of Belgium, I think, right? It's not an epiphenomenon. And here, London, Birmingham, Paris, Brussels, Geneva, Zurich, Glasgow, and other places. It's there. I'm not sure. There's many shapes in understanding trafficking, but I'm sure that it falls into a very, very simple category. It's an abject, overt, physical, emotional abuse to a human being. When there's abuse, there's trauma. When there's trauma, there's PTSD, there's drug, there's pain, there's rage, there's violence, and at the end of the day, there's death very often. So I also reflected on something. I'm not sure, but I think that unknowingly, I'm probably coming across human trafficking many times a day in the streets of London, and probably in my practice as well. So when I've heard Heather and Holly in our little trips in America and the time we spent together, sharing what they saw, what their experience, I'm going to be very direct, guys. What the fuck? And I mean it. So here today, to explore that, two dear friends, leading experts, sadly, are having experienced so many cases, mainly in America, but elsewhere as well. Heather Hayes, she's the lady in blue, blonde. And Heather is the CEO and founder of Heather Hayes and Associates. You name yourself interventionist. My experience of you, Heather, is that there's a bigger picture there. You are keen to knock at those doors and open the doors, step into systems of pain, system of dysfunctioning, systems of family, neighborhood, workplace, and try to understand with a strong background. I mean, beyond again the qualification of intervention and all that, I know the Ericksonian therapist, I know the master level in whatever philosophy it is, and I think this is very important. Your humanity, Heather, is deployed there. So you're the right person, and also you're an FBI hostage negotiator expert. So that's another story, right? And alongside, in grey and black, I'm doing a fashion show now. Holly is beige, sorry. It's in plain sight, but I just cannot. Holly Ryan and Holly, you also knock on those doors and you find the human misery. You're more coming from the addiction counseling universe, and that's your angle to see all that maybe. But you're also so much of a human being. You're the clinical supervisor of Heather Hayes and Associates, the battle, the trenches, all that what you see. So this is what you're going to share with us. It's going to be a poignant sessions, my friends. So let's breathe into that. But I'm so honored, me, iCAAD, the iCAAD team, to have you here today. Thank you.
So it's an absolute honor and privilege to be here and to be presenting with Holly Ryan and on such a difficult topic. And as you said, Christoph, I think part of what my journey has been from early on has been stepping into and helping work with intense emotional pain and trauma and helping get people out of that and help create a road to healing. And this is a beautiful quote that Sam put on Facebook. It's that if we don't start with a wide humanitarian viewpoint, how can we ever dream to work on people's issues with behavioral, emotional, and mental health problems? And I think what we're looking at really is a humanitarian issue.
And if we really look at humanitarianism, what is it? It's a basic belief in the value of human life. And is that not what we all strive to do in our practice, to value each individual that walks into our office just because they're human, not for any other reason than who they are?
We, we work with a lot of different families, and in pulling this talk together, and Holly did part of her master's degree on human trafficking. We really, I think the thing that struck us the most is how often in our practices we're faced with victims of human trafficking and don't even acknowledge it or realize it or have that as much awareness as we should. So we hope by the end of this talk that we'll be able to increase your awareness. We've had a couple of cases. We had a case this year. I'm going to call her Sarah. And this was a case that came to us that was absolutely, we knew that there had been trafficking, mind control. Sarah was 25 years old, grew up in the Midwest, had gone overseas to study in the art and fashion industry, did quite well, came from a very close-knit, high-profile family. Mother's an attorney, father's a well-known physician. And then she landed in Los Angeles working at a boutique. She became prey to a guy online who started seducing her, working with her, and let me get all this up here. Sorry. And over time, she began to develop a relationship with this man, even though she had never met him. He was from Vancouver. Initially, she started talking, isolating from her friends, isolating from her family, spending an enormous amount of time online with this man. And eventually her friends reached out to her parents and said they were concerned. They weren't really sure what was going up. The guy had come to visit a couple of times. And her father stepped in and got private investigators and began trying to investigate this man. They found out that he had absolutely no internet footprint, none. In addition to that, they were able to find 2 other women that he had seduced online who had ended up literally without ever having met him, given him money, gone out and done sexual stuff for him. And she actually went out and got loans, bought stuff, was going to go off with him. And the father discovered that he was not only married but had a baby on the way. So dad comes in and gives her this information, at which point she gets so angry and upset she absolutely disconnects from the family system and runs off with him. Now, runs off up to Vancouver, then back down to Spokane, Washington, then back up to Vancouver. And about this time, the parents came to us and said, we need help, we need to do an intervention. We stepped in and got more intel. So part of what happens in trafficking cases often is that you have to work, closely with law enforcement and with private investigators. So we were able to, get more information. We were able to find her, and on several attempts of ours to try and get face-to-face with her, to offer her help, we were unsuccessful. In fact, at one point, she went through his guidance to law enforcement. We were working, do you want to talk about when you had to call?
Yeah, so we're connected with this PI and we're running into some barriers and we think, okay, we have some local contacts at the local PD, get them involved. And I leave a message and I get a call back from the FBI, the director of the FBI in Washington. And I explain everything. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this could be it. This could be our break in the case. And he very clearly says to me, if you involve us, because of the political climate right now, there will be more red tape. You will be able to do less for this young woman than if you didn't have us on board. At that stage for us, that is jarring. Here we are going to the highest authority that we have at our disposal, and we are told, we're really sorry. That sounds like a horrible situation. This girl is very clearly in danger. We can't help.
In addition, well, first off, let me say that's part of what happens when you say human trafficking and you make a call, you get a call back from the FBI, not just local law enforcement. The other thing is that at that point, the young woman then went to law enforcement in her local town where she was now living and filed a stalking complaint against her family and against us. And law enforcement stepped in and backed us all down through the court systems. So very complicated, very complex, and a case that is still ongoing, but that we have not been able to really have much success with. And I think part of what we could have stood here all day and given you successful cases. I think what we learn from are the ones that don't go well, where we have a lot of difficulty.
We were able to obtain the one of the complaints that she had filed and compare it to previous things that she had written, right? Her handwriting was different, maybe not even hers. The verbiage that was in there was nothing that the family or anybody that knew her was aware of. It was all just coached. Very clearly, she was under the control of somebody else.
And no control of her funds, her money. You want to talk about Joe? I'll put him up.
First met Joe when he was 15, and his story is much different, much more of when I think of human trafficking, this is something that is a little bit more, comes to my mind. At 13 years old, he lived in a very, very, impoverished city in Guatemala, and the neighbor approached his parents and said, if this, we can get him here and he can make money. He can go to school, kind of sold them the American dream. And so at 13, he is taken to the U.S. border and dropped off, where then they're put into kind of like a holding tank. And then any young adolescent can get sponsored. Now, to be a sponsor of a minor in the United States, you have to have no background check, just an ID. Yeah, an ID, and be able to prove that there is a living condition that will be safe. So he was trafficked and then picked up by traffickers of the same network in the States, taken to Ohio, where he was then put to work on a chicken farm. And there's a lot of news, of media surrounding these cases. One particular company got in a lot of trouble and put to work. So at 13, 14, 15 years old, he is working from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., occasionally getting some education because you have to keep the local authorities at bay. And he is repeatedly sexually traumatized. He is beaten. He's living in deplorable conditions. Some of the photos are of trailers where there's 15, 20 people living. And in fact, underneath the trailers are dug out, and there's beds, and there's children's clothing, there's children's shoes. Very clearly, they're housing people underneath the trailers. In Joe's own words, what haunts him the most is not the flashbacks from the sexual trauma. It is the smell and the heat from walking up and down the chicken farms picking up dead chickens day after day after day. He was kept and trapped by threats to his family. Now he was taken from his home, so that fear, that threat is very real. The traffickers know his family. The traffickers use that as a tool to enslave this young man. And that is just one, right? That is just one example. That is just one case of somebody that has survived. And I say survived because how many of these kids, how many of these young souls are lost without ever having the opportunity to tell their story?
So today, again, this is a quote from an immigration attorney, but in our own country we have today a lot of victims of human trafficking that are invisible to our own eyes. Let's not forget that some of them are kids and that the end game is to subject them to peonage, to slavery. They're easy prey, they're vulnerable, and they're easy to victimize. And most importantly, I think it's that they're alone. I'll let you take.
So what defines human trafficking? What is it, right? This is a term that we hear, and we're hearing more and more often, but what is it? So we have it broken down into 3 parts. The act, actually getting the ways in which they attract, they promote, and they draw in, and they acquire. And I want to be really clear on the verbiage that we're using here, because they are acquiring humans, right? Possessions. The means, threat or use force to remove, abduct, coerce, decept, fraud. It's abuse of power, preying on a person to control the victim. It's all about control. The end game here is, and we'll talk about it a little later, absolute mental defeat. Absolute, where you no longer have a sense of self. And the purpose, and here is, simply it's exploitation. Sex workers, prostitution, forced labor, slavery, removal of organs, and one that has very little research behind it. There's a lot of big numbers, but the financial gain. And I think what's important is we have to look within our own industry and look at the financial gain from our own. The numbers. Now this is shocking. At any given time, in 2016, an estimated 43 million people are in modern slavery. That is more than at any other time in history. 24.9 in forced labor, 15.4 million in forced marriage. And if you think about that, the rights, the control that somebody, when you're married, the access that you're given, right? There are 5.4 victims of modern slavery for every 1,000 people in the world. So we're in a rather large city here. Walking down the street, the odds that in the last 24 hours you have walked past somebody that is in some form of modern slavery is absolute. 1 in 4 victims of modern slavery are children. So then we go into kind of where it breaks down the amount of people in the different subsets, and I don't know that we have to go into the exact specifics, but it is just horrifying, right? And these are statistics, these are numbers that nobody wants to talk about.
On the Onion router, which is how you get to the dark web, 4 out of every 5 visits takes you into sites that show child abuse, pedophilia. So again, it's rampant, and a lot of it is connected through the dark web. Yeah.
As we touched on, right? Slavery was abolished 150 years ago.
And yet, there are more people in slavery today than we've had in our history. Yeah.
So who is falling victim, right? Who is being preyed upon? Of the 43 million people, 51% are females, adult females over the age of 18. 21% are adult males. 20% are adolescent females, adolescent and children, anybody under the age of 18. And 8% are young men, boys, children. how much is the life worth? And there's a great, if you search online at hashtag no price on people, there's an amazing video that asks people about what they think of human trafficking, what they've learned. And in it comes this slide. The average price of a human is $90, right? How much did you pay for your shoes? $90. Also, as we kind of dug further in, where you were born, things that are out of your control, your nationality, your race, all make you worth a different amount, right?
Yep.
It is a billion-dollar industry.
It's actually the third biggest industry out there, next to illegal industry, next to illegal arms and drugs. So we went over who had to say this number, 109 billion, trillion, you know, 99 billion from sex slavery, 34 billion from labor, construction, 9 billion in agriculture, 8 billion annually is saved by private households that employ laborers that have been trafficked. Yeah.
8 billion is saved.
Saved, yeah. So why is trafficking? Why now? Well, first off, globalization. With the increase of globalization and the markets and the internet and technology, it has also increased the ability and the accessibility to traffic. With poverty out there, there are a lot of impoverished folks that look at any way out of their poverty, so they will send their children off, they will send their loved ones off. There are countries where, for example, female children are not valued like male children, so those children, like in Nepal, are often sold into slavery, where the males are coveted. You've got children who are turned into soldiers at a young age, that are recruited by terrorist organizations, that are trained to go out and to fight and to kill, or to, we often see, like, for example, when you think of India and other countries, kids that are even maimed and sent out to beg for their families to get money for them, into forced labor. There's a large population where organs, our kidneys in particular, are taken and sold. Sexual exploitation, the selling of children into families for adoption. And again, it is a billion-dollar industry. There is a lot of money being made off of human life. So again, our types of human trafficking, in general, you've got forced labor, you've got child trafficking, you've got sexual exploitation, and you've got the removal of organs. And I think when we talk about, with this too, one of the things that we will touch on a little bit too is with a lot of what happened in the addiction industry in the United States, where patients were being brokered and sold into treatment centers. We had a lot of arrests made. Those arrests were made under the human trafficking law. So again, selling of people for whatever reason.
So if you don't know what you were looking for, you won't really find anything, right? Mm-hmm. If you're walking down the street, you're window shopping, you're not looking. So I think one of the things we want to bring awareness to is opening our eyes, right? Being present and looking and seeing. The indicators for human trafficking are enormous. There's lists.
Yeah. People may be fearful of authorities, just fearful in general. Part of what happens, part of the dynamic is that people who are trafficked, there's a whole psychological dynamic where they will believe that they are in danger or their families back home are in danger, and that's part of what keeps people entrapped. They may have signs of physical or psychological trauma. They may be anxious. They may look dependent. They may have flashbacks. They may have bruising. They may look exhausted. They often don't have their passports with them. They don't have access to their money. They don't have, they're moved around a lot. that they're told, particularly the little ones, that they're under, again, controlled by witchcraft or juju or whatever, but they have limited access to those basic human rights, medical care, food, housing, emotional freedom. Yeah. With sexual exploitation too, again, often what we're seeing is that men and women are being moved around. They're not staying in one place. Hotels are often used as brothels today, or Airbnbs are used as brothels. So there's not that sedentary, so there's a lot of transition, a lot of transient, and again, that keeps them hidden, that keeps attention from being called to them. You may see, again, not a lot of clothing, a lot of substance use given to people to keep into the trafficking, and also for their ability to deal with the pain that comes with it. Often, again, STDs, illnesses, rape, and often they don't have any access to their money, which is keeping them, again, trapped.
An important point when we're talking about kind of the warning signs, the general indicators, is to think about clients or people that you encounter, that you come across, whatever discipline you're in. Are they presenting with 1, 2, 3, 4 of these symptoms that we may not make the connection? Right? Here we see somebody that just has a horrible trauma history. What does that trauma history really entail?
Or we'll say, in getting the history of someone who's a substance abuser, just to be stereotypical, she sold herself for drugs. She exchanged sex for drugs. We say that often. And yet I don't know that we go deeper into what that really means and really look at the trauma bond and everything that comes with it. Same with forced labor. Mm-hmm. Again, people are worked, there's a threat of physical harm, there's a threat of deportation, there's a threat of what's going to happen at home, there's pressure that's put on those who immigrate to make money to send back to those that are starving. The wages are usually minimal, the hours are extreme, and then there's no health care, no documentation that comes with it.
With forced labor, one of the most of the victims are subjected to, they believe they're in debt, right? They have to pay off the debt of being brought to wherever they are. And if they don't, their families will be harmed, they will be killed. It's horrible to think, but the traffickers say, you think you have it bad now, this is what it will look like if you don't continue doing this. An abuse of a child's vulnerability by a person's position of power or trust, exploiting that position to obtain sexual services in exchange for some form of favor, such as alcohol, drugs, attention, or gifts. The Engaged team at Blackburn.
So again, part of what you might see are with children is that they go missing, truant, that there's a lot of secrecy about what's happening with them. They have unexplained money or presence that they wouldn't normally have. You see them experimenting with drugs. We've worked with a lot of men and women who in their teenage years were exploited during the day, and their families didn't even know or weren't even aware of it. Again, being groomed by older people or associated with other people. We see a lot of that even with some of the child pornography rings, in relationships with significantly older people, taking part in social activities with no plausible explanation. Again, the pieces just don't fit, and what we're seeing more and more is that a lot of this is happening online, so that a lot of our young men and women are going on to chat roulette sites and other places and ending up having almost secret double lives with older people, older men, older women. And then often they're engaged in criminal activities. So you get people who are recruited and then are told to go shoplift or pickpocket or get money for the families. Again, there are times where they're used to do things like mule drugs, run money, those sorts of things too. So
how many times have you guys seen the show Cops or seen something like that, right? Where there's a TV show built around law enforcement going and running kind of, they're busting Johns and they're looking at prostitution. The victims are criminalized. Here is mainstream media. We are watching these victims be exploited by the mainstream media for a profit.
Right. And again, with labor, I think is the next one, domestic labor, domestic servitude. Again, you have people that may be living with a family, and again, they are, isolated. They have sometimes no sleeping space, no proper bedroom, excessive hours, on call 24/7, never allowed to leave the home. They may be malnourished, overworked. And again, often they are reported as missing or accused of crime by their employer if they try and escape. So that's part of what keeps them in as well, is that they're, the threat of going to jail.
Here we have just a kind of the trend of trafficking. The other forms in that red, that top, is kind of that financial gain that we're looking at, that organ removal. And then the biggest forms are for forced labor, which is almost, it's beginning to rise to the level of sexual exploitation. And I think one of the things that's tricky here is how do we classify somebody that is being forced to work during the day on a farm, in a household, and then into sexual exploitation at night, or vice versa, So I think the cross, the cross of the categories is really confusing. Every 30 seconds, another person becomes a victim of human trafficking. Every 30 seconds.
Do you want to give a little bit well, I'll let you do this part because I'm not a millennial. I learned that yesterday in Don Grant's talk. QC. So do you want to give a little bit of intro to this lovely?
Absolutely. This is Matthew Diaco. This is in Toronto, and I just had it. He is what they call a Romeo pimp. And he'll, in his own words, you'll get to hear him describe this. He voluntarily subjected himself to this interview with the Toronto Star newspaper up there. And in many of the other interviews they talk about it's purely because of his narcissism that he willingly told everybody about this. And it is interesting.
There's a dangerous game being played in Toronto and across the country. Romeo pimps who promise love and security, then enslave girls.
That line in there, why will she do it? Because you sold her a dream. Knowing someone cares, it's an illusion. Right? And I think we want to be very clear that Matthew was very focused on females, but it is not solely the female population that is experiencing this. And then if we when we really look at the psychology of it, right, the pathology, what the women that are experiencing this go through, this more than likely is not the first time that they have been victimized.
And that other piece too, it's not hard. You find that crack. You sell them drugs. Some need to hear, I love you. I'll take care of you. Really going in and finding and preying upon that vulnerability. Yeah. So part of what happens, again, is you've got, at the core of everything, is that power and control. You've got the emotional violence that takes place, that emotional terrorism, where you've got the isolating from support, pulling in that shame, the humiliation, all of the violence, the threat of violence. And then you have the physical violence, the torture, the branding. Often the women and men are branded. There's certain tattoos that you will see. There are GPS trackers that are inserted, barcodes that are put on them. They are forced drugs to keep them manageable or as a form of restraint, denied food, bathroom access. Then you've got the sexual violence, the prostitution, the gang rape, the sexual shaming, the degradation. And then you've got the purposeful manipulation where you really come in, just like he was saying, and exploiting their insecurities. I mean, that's exactly what you heard from him. You find what where are they vulnerable? What are they missing? Where do they not feel secure? What do they need to hear? And coming in and preying upon that. With that too, you get the economic dependence, where all the assets, the money are taken from the victim. You refuse to let them flourish. Even with Sarah, for example, she was put into debt. She was not allowed to have access to her money. And this is a college-educated woman who was really taken out of a very good career. And again, that isolation, pulling away from family, from support, from even friends within the community, and some are even unaware of where they are or what their location is. So total control. And again, using the coercion, the threats, threatening their families, threatening them, blackmail, harming others, harming the other women or men that are there with them, is all used to help keep power and control.
Entrapment by any means, what we're talking about. They will go to any length, the traffickers, the people that are controlling these people. Just put it all up.
Yeah.
Psychological confinement is another, it's kind of the ultimate goal there, and we'll talk more about that, the psychological confinement, the defeat. And you see stories, and we've worked with women and men that have been under and experienced human trafficking, but they'll go to the store. They'll go out. They'll interact on some level with people around them. And the question is always, why didn't you leave? Why? You had the experience, right? And so I think when we're looking at how we treat these victims and how we work with these clients, that question, why didn't you leave? That in itself is re-traumatizing. That is shaming. That keeps them quiet, right? As we've talked about this whole time, it is just the ultimate confinement. It breaks down the human psyche, right? You no longer have the ability to make decisions on your own, the ability to move freely throughout your life. As Heather was talking about, the GPS trackers are being implanted. Why didn't you leave? Well, he knows where I am.
So again, other examples of the physical abuse, the kidnapping, the restraint, the fraud. Often people are brought into other countries under false pretenses. You're coming to work, we've got a job for you, we're recruiting you, and yet they get to where they're going and all of that's not true, it's incorrect, and then they're stuck.
There was a massive increase after the hurricanes that we had over in the States, Hurricane Katrina and all of that, and the devastation, and workers are promised, come to the States, we've got these jobs, we've got to help clean up, and they're not paid. They're living in an area that has been devastated, no power, no running water, no food, and they are forced to work. And we're seeing the news, Why isn't it getting cleaned up? What are they doing?
I'll give you another example of the forced coercion. And we had a client about 3 or 4 years ago, and he was 19 years old, probably on the Asperger spectrum somewhere, and was obsessed, probably a little bit addicted, with gaming and with the violent games, the games where you all play together and you have that sort of communal, we're live, we've got our teams. And his parents contacted us because they had found an airline ticket to Germany. And it was just by luck that they'd found this ticket. He was due to leave in 3 days. And what they discovered was that he had been recruited because of his ability in gaming, because of some of the networks. This is a place where an ISIS group had come in and recruited him, and they had sent him an airline ticket to come to Germany to get him over to Syria to begin to fight, and had capitalized on what a great marksman he was, how good he was at the gaming, how much they valued him. You know, again, that sort of mind control, really preying upon his vulnerabilities. Parents were able to step in. We actually had to get Homeland Security involved in some other issues to help solve it. But again, that was an example if the parents hadn't have found the tickets to Germany, where he would have just disappeared. And who knows when they would have, if they ever would have found him. So again, you know, some of the other warning signs that you'll see for domestic minor sex trafficking, you know, homelessness. A lot of our homeless teens are picked up and put into trafficking. You may see some of them running away a lot. They may come around and have older boyfriends or older men. The tattoos, again, are often things, there's certain tattoos or signs and symbols that show that they're property of a pimp. You know, again, you'll see signs of violence or psychological trauma, STDs, substance abuse, again, access to things. Like one of the things that we will see is maybe someone who's a teen who will end up having expensive shoes or expensive jewelry that they really wouldn't normally afford. Again, sneaking out in the middle of the night, you know, missing their curfews. And then on the lookout too, traveling with older people who are holding on to their passports or holding on to their IDs and not handing those over, who aren't guardians. We actually, the airlines have done a good job at trying to really train the flight attendants to look out for human trafficking. We actually, in our transport company, we're transporting an older woman from one treatment center to another, because she had run from the other treatment center. She was 84. And so we were I had my transport people were flying her from Texas to New Jersey, and they got stopped. They were in first class, and they got stopped by the pilot, who said to the, you know, what are you doing? Are you trafficking this older woman? Asked her if she was okay. And so I was actually happy that they did that, that they were aware. Anyway.
So here it is. The ultimate goal is mental defeat, right? When the person who's being victimized has reached the state of total behavioral and cognitive submission. They no longer see themselves as a human. They no longer see themselves as a being. They just do. There's no more autonomy. There's no more kind of that thought process. It is just complete submission.
And that total lack of sense of self, who I am, what is my purpose, what is my meaning. Yeah. And with that, you know, again, what happens? PTSD, complex PTSD, dissociative disorders, anxiety disorders, depression, attachment disorders, developmental issues, eating disorders, self-mutilation, substance use disorders. I mean, there's a lot that comes from trafficking. And the other piece too is that there's a lot, it's hard working with this population. It's hard sitting through a talk like this. This room is not filled for a reason. This is a hard topic to hear. It's one that we want to turn our back to. So our clients end up with all kinds of mental health issues. And those of us on the front lines working with them end up getting almost secondary PTSD from hearing the stories as well. It can be very painful, very difficult. So let's talk about treatment. What do we do? What does it look like?
As this video begins, pay attention, you can see it right here, to the tattoo that is on this young woman's shoulder.
Most of these girls, like I said, they're broken. It's not hard.
So the women,
With this particular one, these two reporters had actually heard, and they're investigative journalists, and they were told, and through their connections, to go to this specific hotel and to watch. And so they spent days watching. And within an hour of them being there, they started to notice the cars and the patterns, and slowly gained access and gained trust, and helped them out. Those women were victims of Matthew Diaco as well. So when he was arrested, there was access to these women, and the reporters were there, and they were familiar faces.
but as you listen to them speak, I mean, what did you hear based on what we talked about earlier? What did you hear them talking about? The tattoos. I wanted to be loved. He told me he loved me. There was competition. I wanted to be the special one. He controlled when we slept, when we showered, when we ate, what we ate. You know, all of that. In fact, is it 64% of the, yeah.
And I don't know that we have to go through every one, but
Right.
PTSD symptoms. In the study that was conducted by Zimmerman in 2006, 63% of the victims he contacted reported every symptom up there. 63%.
Yeah, from trafficking, right? Yeah, yeah. And so what we get is what we, call complex PTSD. Complex PTSD, complex trauma is when you have repeated, horrific trauma. Again, sexual abuse, physical abuse, witnessing rape, witnessing horrors, emotional abuse, neglect, physical, all of these, war, terrorism, and not just one and not just one time, but over and over and over again. So again, this is what our victims of human trafficking are experiencing. Again, all of that. And the thing about trauma, we're going to talk for a minute about trauma, is that trauma affects everyone around them as well. So it's not just about the person who's traumatized, but it's also about people who come in contact with them. So if we look back at sort of a typical example, there have been studies that have shown that our veterans who come home and it displays signs of PTSD in their families, their spouses, their children will also begin to be anxious, use substances, and have symptoms of PTSD. Trauma is about perception. I mean, if there's anything that you take home from this today, it's that. It's that what one person experiences as traumatic, if they say it's traumatic, it's traumatic. What may not be difficult for me may be extremely difficult for Holly. You can have 3 children in the same car accident, and 2 of them may have no signs of PTSD and a 3rd will. So it all has to do with our experience, our filter, our makeup, what we've been through in the past, what we bring into the trauma we're experiencing, the meaning we give to that. And trauma is, for trauma survivors, surprise is not a good thing. Surprise is, I think I'm going to a country to have a great life, and it turns out, surprise, it's not. Surprise is, I think I'm going to a friend's party and I get molested by the uncle. Surprise, it's not a good. Surprise can be re-traumatizing. And we'll talk about that a little more when we talk about the surprise model of intervention. With trauma, again, we see, we can break it down into sort of 4 categories. Inflow, where something is done to me. I'm traumatized. I am the victim. I am mugged. I am raped. I am forced to work. I am forced to do something that I don't want to do. But then you also have where, trauma outflow, where I end up doing things that I feel terribly about. So I end up having a car accident and killing someone, or I'm in a situation where I'm competing with another woman to get the John's attention, so I'm going to do something horrible to her to sabotage her because I really want that attention. It's traumatic. Then there's crossflow or vicarious traumatization, which is where, again, it's by viewing, seeing things. And often one of the ways that people who are trafficked are kept contained is by watching the beating of others, the rape of others, beating of their parents. And then there's reflexive, which is done to self. And so again, that goes into a lot of different categories. I mean, self-mutilation. The paradox of mutilation is that often it helps keep trauma survivors alive while the trauma is happening, and yet it's traumatic and turns on them. I also think that with the substance abusers that we work with, all of them end up traumatizing themselves. We all do things that we don't normally want to do when we're high, because we're impaired. If I'm 19 years old and I'm addicted to heroin and I don't have any, and I'm running out and I'm jonesing and my pimp is gross, or my dealer is gross, and I go have sex with him for the drugs, have I been raped? I'm certainly re-traumatizing and traumatizing myself. So again, with that, we see all kinds of sexual acting out for drugs in our industry, and it's re-traumatizing. It interferes with boundary issues. Sex and love get very confused. Confused for comforting, control, a way to get drugs. Yeah. So when we come in and talk about doing trauma-informed interventions, coming in and working with trauma survivors, there's some things that are very important. One of which is that the interventionist has got to be able to work with PTSD and dissociative disorders. We've got to be able to come in and work in a way where we are not re-traumatizing these men and women and children. You've got to be aware of grounding techniques, how to help people not dissociate, be extraordinarily aware of not re-traumatizing our clients. And sometimes that includes looking at the gender of the clinician, whether you're going to pair up. You've got to be able to come in and look for eating disorders, self-mutilation, some of the other issues that come with, and look at really where are we going to put someone in treatment so that they don't get into treatment and end up, getting beat up again. And we'll talk again a little more about the dangers of the surprise model, because again, surprise is not a good thing for trauma survivors. Dissociation is a natural response. We all dissociate. We all dissociate on a continuum. So when I sit and I go, I want to listen to the third song on my iPad, and I get doing something and I'm thinking and I'm daydreaming and this and that, and I've missed the third song, I have just dissociated. We all do it. Dissociation is also a way that we come in and we respond to trauma. It helps us to survive. So if I am a cave woman and I am out hunting and gathering and I'm going along and all of a sudden a saber-toothed tiger jumps out and tries to, I'm going to go into one of three things: fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm going to do whatever I need to do to survive. And then when I get back to my cave, all that fear, all that, oh my God, I almost died, that got wrapped up, dissociated, and put in this little container, I get back to my cave at night, and then it's going to come back. But I couldn't feel all that fear in the moment because I would not have been able to fight, flight, or freeze to save myself. So dissociation, that compartmentalization, actually helps us to stay alive. It helps us to survive. The problem is that those containers are not real stable. And so when a person is traumatized, the only way you can go through a lot of those horrific experiences is to take all the feelings, to take what's happening, and split it off from yourself. And then later, sorry, that's me. Part of what happens is that they'll come back, flashbacks, things are triggered. And we'll see things triggered by things that people see, things they hear. Smells are a huge one. Often people will compartmentalize and not have the cognitive memory of what's happened. They may not have the feeling memory of what's happened. I had a client once who, some of you maybe heard me tell this example before, but he was at a barbecue And the wind was out, and there was a lot of smoke, and he went into a blinding rage. Through a lot of his work, what he ended up remembering, becoming more in touch with, is that he had been in Vietnam. It was a very windy day. They were burning some brush, and a load of napalm was dropped on his troop, and he was the only survivor. That had happened years ago. He'd taken all the feelings from that and tucked it away, and it was triggered by the smoke, the rustling of the leaves, of the wind, the feel, the sound of the leaves, blinding rage. So again, there are things that will come along unbeknownst to people that will trigger. And again, that can also be, we'll see often pain. You know, pain will trigger other experiences, dates, seasons, stressors that remind us of things. So when a person dissociates, part of what it looks like is, you know, someone can be stiff, dazing off, like they're not here. They may report feeling like they're outside of themselves, depersonalizing. They may blink. They may have memory lapses or miss part of a conversation. Not feeling pain. I've actually had clients who have burned themselves and not felt it because they were so dissociated. So again, one of the hardest things too about trauma is because of the nature of it, we often don't even begin to have signs or symptoms of PTSD until we're finally in a safe place because we're in survival mode, and it's unfair. You get to a safe place, you get reunited with your family, you get back, and then here come those feelings. Because we're no longer in that mode that says, I have to survive, I'm at war, I've got to keep going. The mind and body relaxes, and here it comes.
Or you're in treatment, you're finally in a safe place, and suddenly all of this resurfaces. And how do we, is that person acting out? Is that person disrupting our milieu? Mm-hmm. Or is that person finally in a safe enough place where their brain is accessing things that have been done to them? And how do we treat those clients?
Right. What's our understanding? And intervention, again, it's important to look at. Often you need co-therapy so that there are two of you, male-female teams. You know, again, do you come in and use a more transparent form of intervention where you give an invitation, where they know the intervention's coming? Versus that surprise, which can again be re-traumatizing just in and of itself. You certainly don't want to come in and be confrontational and, you know, we're going to come in and, you know, some people do their interventions in a way where they come in and start with, here's what we're going to take away from you, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're going to get. It is horrific in any way, much less for a trauma survivor. And again, often we end up with many level agencies involved. Even with like our story about Sarah, we had the FBI, we had PIs, we had family services, we had a social worker, you know, up in the area involved. We had law enforcement involved. So it's also important to know that you've got to come in and counter the trauma bond. You know, again, part of what happens is that it's difficult, particularly with trauma, for people to often get away, to leave. It comes back to that, you know, why? You know, so part of how you do that, do you want to read one, I'll read the other? Yeah.
So the trafficker provides, on this side, traffickers, pimps seek to fill emotional voids and needed roles.
And so what we need to do is come in and find out, what are those needs being met? How do we come in and help that? You know, how do we help with building love, self-love, self-esteem?
Traffickers and pimps provide hope, which they will later exploit.
So we have to come in and give hope through different ways, through skill building, through education, for advocating for people.
Traffickers and pimps fill physical needs.
So we have to come in and provide holistic programs and services, health care, physical care, nutritional care, psychological.
Traffickers and pimps thrive off of fear, intimacy, creating instability.
So you have to come in and really help find a safe, stable place and long-term care. This is part of why some clients will often really absolutely decompensate when you go to the next level of care. So they do really well in inpatient treatment. They get to that next level where there's more freedom, and they absolutely are unable to sustain it because the stabilization issues. It's too scary in the moment.
Traffickers and pimps manipulate, lie, betray, and they let the victim down, but they are always there.
So you've got to come in and set realistic, honest expectations and be consistent, transparent, don't lie, don't give false hope.
I think one of the things is that is hard is in an intervention, in building rapport with a client, you want to provide hope, right? But when you're working with victims of trafficking, they've been promised the world and beaten down. And so how are we presenting in front of them, right? How do we say, this can get better, you can get through this.
Trust us.
Trust us, right? Who was the last person that said, trust me? We're gonna get through this together. We're gonna be a team.
Yeah, we got you. Yeah. So again, it's important to work with the families too, to help them establish boundaries, to look at, how do we support health, not demise? How do we come in and really, set boundaries that we can hold? Because, sometimes boundaries have never been held. Sometimes they've been tested. Sometimes when you get someone out of one of these situations, they reunite with the family. The families are fragile. They're scared. And often, again, I have had clients who were kicked. I had a client several years ago who another interventionist had done an intervention. She had a lot of mental health issues and the parents were told to just cut her off. They didn't see their daughter for 2 years because she went into a group of travelers that were, kind of live like hobos and traveling street family and was into trafficking. So, again, it's important, on the front end of interventions to look at that whole, like, do you kick people out of the house? How much threatening do you do? Once someone's already been through this, you really don't want to come in and say, we're going to disconnect if you don't do what we want you to do. How do you do that? Think outside the box. Again, and it's important to be able to bond with the client, know and understand what they've been through, help the family with healthy boundaries. Again, the families need lots of support, lots of guidance. They're fragile. They'll go from one end to the extreme of, we're done, to another extreme of we can't do anything, particularly if you're going through reunification. Families need a lot of help. And again, in the family systems, the generational issues have got to be addressed and examined. Parents have got to be educated.
With Sarah, with the case that's kind of ongoing, the parents have completely decompensated. Mm-hmm. Dad, the once successful, prominent doctor, hasn't been to work in 3 months.
Can't work.
He was so distraught in the middle of the night after seeing an Instagram post that he fell out of bed and hit his head. There's concern of a traumatic brain injury. Mm-hmm. Mom,
an Instagram post by Sarah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Mom, 30-something years with the same company, is on the verge of losing her job because her day is consumed by looking, finding, trying to see what she can do.
Telling the same story over and over and over again, even to us. Like hours of the same story of us, and she's in therapy too, of us saying, we know this, you told us, let's move into something else, but clinging on to the details because it's all she's got right now. Again, often when you're going in and working, you end up bringing in private investigators, law enforcement. You've got to find people, you have to extract them from the situations that they're in. You have to locate. So that's a whole nother layer, a whole nother issue. And there is the potential of violence, not just from the person you're intervening on, but from the system that they're in which you're trying to get them out of. Again, for the professionals, part of what we do is we come in and really take a look at the behaviors. What, is it addiction? Is it high risk? Make the proper placements. And to really look at everything within the context of how it's impacting the family system and teaching the families how to begin to rebond, how to connect, how to communicate. But it's also important as professionals that everyone work within the scope of their practice and training. These are not the kind of interventions that you want to do if you don't have a strong background in working with trauma. Yes.
And the ability, and the ability to assess that on the front end.
Right.
Right? So somebody calls for what appears up front as your typical, I use that word loosely, alcohol and drug intervention, right?
Right.
Do you assess, investigate, find out more of what is going on with this case, or do you, the interventionist, just take it on, say, I got this, and walk into a situation where there is extreme trauma?
So part of what we see too with the dissociative disorders that come from this dissociative amnesia or fugue state, parts where people don't remember what's happened, they don't remember pieces, they lose track of time. Depersonalization disorder, where you end up feeling like you're outside of yourself. And then dissociative identity disorder, which can also come on a continuum between differentiated ego states all the way to dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, in which you have several different parts that may have complete amnesia between each, not remembering what's happened. You often get, again, generalized anxiety, panic attacks, OCD, substance use disorder, rampant. We can send y'all the PowerPoint if you need it. We'll give you that at the end. The cameras. Okay, so anyway, human trafficking victims have greater needs because they basically walk away from their situation with nothing except the clothes on their back. Thus, they have no way to feed themselves, nowhere to live, and no transportation. Many, when they get out, have nothing. And what I think is so important, and I don't just mean with trafficking victims, I mean in general, is that next slide, is that we really come in and we have got to begin to work more at coming from a place of strength versus pathologizing our clients, not looking at them as cases or symptoms, but looking at them as unique individuals that have strengths, that are resilient, that have talents, that are creative, that are sensitive. Not looking at therapy as problem-based, but look at therapy as possibility-focused. You hear the differences? Again, personal accounts aid in helping diagnose. Forget it. Looking at personal accounts is a route to knowing the person. Our clients know more about themselves than we know about them. So why would we ever come in and say, well, you're going to do this, or you're going to, look at them as the best resource we have in helping us understand who they are. Practitioners who are skeptical about the stories, particularly about the abuse, you've got to come in and believe them. Believe every story they say, every story they tell you. Again, don't look at the childhood trauma as a predictor of, and we've said that for years, if you have trauma and as a child, you're more likely to get raped or get abused or this or that. What a horrible thing to say, to look at childhood trauma. It's not predictive, but it may weaken a person. It may strengthen them. It's part of their history. Again, look at the families as the experts and the individuals. The work is, come in and what are we working on? Not what we, the practitioners, think your treatment plan should be, but how do we together collaborate and come up with the goals for you to get your entire family into health. And again, look at choice, control, commitment as personal, that they're open, they're not limited by pathology. It's not that our clients are sick or that our families are sick, which is a term that I think gets thrown around a lot, and it's very degrading. Our families are resilient, our clients made it on their feet right in front of us. And to be able to have done that, they have to have been strong, gone through it, they survived. A lot of people have failure to thrive and die or kill themselves. So again, look for resources, look for strengths, look at helping from, again, that strength-based place, not that pathologizing.
Are we pathologizing our clients, or are we seeing the humanity in them?
Right. And again, looking at the mental health needs of our victims. Again, there are differences. Foreign-born victims, are going to have more stressors when they're in a foreign country and they're looking at deportation and that sort of things. Looking at the violation of trust. I think if we can go maybe the need for a continuum of care, but one of the most important things I think, is to really also look at what Holly talked about earlier. Part of what happens in abuse is that trust is violated. Trust from parents, trust from loved ones, trust from authority figures, trust from people who come in and say, trust me because I'm going to give you a better life. And that trust becomes so violated. And that is the most difficult thing that we're up against. Well, not the most, but one of. It's a tapestry of difficulties. And so we've got to be able to come in and help build that trust back up. And how do you do that? You know. So again, you know, a lot of what's happening these days is we've got more services out there. We've got more evidence-based practice. We've got task force. We have task force in Atlanta for human trafficking. We have signs in the Atlanta airport, and yet we don't talk about it a lot. But that trust building, again, it's the foundation, and it's so difficult. You know, they've been lied to, they've been frauded, and so we've got to come in and really acknowledge that and talk about how hard it is to trust. Why would you trust? And how do we come in and be as non-judgmental and help create that space?
I think about how many times have I, as a clinician, been having an off day and a client comes in, and I personalize that behavior, right? And how does that skew how I see a client? How does that, you know, interrupt that process that is happening? Or, you know, when I say I'm going to do something with a client and I don't do it, it's the end of it, right? I have just damaged that trust, that relationship, and that repair takes weeks, if ever.
Or I don't explain things. I'm on a transport and I don't say, here's what we're going to do, here's where we're going to go, here's what's going to happen next, here's why 15-year-old you're going to wear a backpack, because I don't want to put my hands on you because you've been traumatized, and I want to be respectful of that. So sometimes we just go in and we just do things without explanation, again, which are re-traumatizing to trauma survivors. So again, there's a need for interdisciplinary teams. It takes a team to work with the families, with the individuals, to pull together all of the resources needed. And it's important to see, you know, again, that often the way our clients react are a result of how it's automatic. They don't have control over it. It's a result of what they've been through. It comes from their limbic system. It is a survival technique. We've got to have cultural competency. We've got to be able to work you know, again, and understand where our clients have come from. We've got to be able to come in and also know that we're working within the scope of our practice and do our ethical piece with that. You know, we've got to work to depathologize the families and, again, help educate.
I think managing the family's expectation of the reunification.
Yeah.
is key, right? They're so excited. They want to run up and give Susie a hug.
Yeah.
That to Susie is like, it's horrible. It's horrifying. It's re-traumatizing. So really being able to educate and allow the family to experience their own grief, but at the same time know that the child, the loved one that is coming back to them is not necessarily the same one that left.
So some of the challenges that come up with reunification, again, you know, it can be a time of joy and adjustment, but it can also be a time that's very awkward and very painful. And again, you've got the trust issues. You've got the fact that they've been often missing pieces, all of that shame. So again, I think we can go forward a little bit, because I know we have about 8 minutes left. Let's see. Yeah. So again, some of the barriers that come into place, the mental health issues, the lack of resources. You know, a lot of clients, you know, I think that there are a lot of clients that we see in our high-end facilities, but there are also a lot of clients, a lot of people out there who don't have those resources. Mm-hmm. And, you know, again, when you get legal involved, it gets complicated, and often people get re-traumatized within our legal system when they have to testify, when they have to get cross-examined, when they have to go through that experience. And again, I think our denial, our lack of awareness, our lack of sensitivity, lack of treatment for it all, and then the stigma, that comes with it. It's hard to say I'm a victim of human trafficking. I'm a victim of.
And I think also the stigma that is out there of if you're driving down the street and you see a woman on the corner, what's your first thought?
Prostitute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, with the trust too, the trust was used to gain access to the victims, and it's just important to remember that trust is something that's going to be a trigger. Even the fact that someone can trust, they're going to begin to have a lot of feelings and reactions to that because it's been so scary before, because it's been so abused and misused. And often there's not an ability to control that. Trust is an important part of healing. Yeah.
So shifting perspective, right? We have to stop treating the stigma and begin treating the human. Sam so eloquently talked about the humanitarian viewpoint and how if we lose sight of the value of each person in front of us, how do we help them? How do we stop from my first thought being there's a prostitute on the corner to, oh my gosh, what has that woman or man been through? How do I challenge those around me when they are talking in a degrading way about somebody, right? Am I going to be the one that joins them? Or am I going to be the one that challenges this, that begins to bring light to this, that begins to talk about it, that has, can step outside that box and say, maybe she's not doing it of her own free will. We don't know. How do we break that denial?
Right. For sense.
So there's 1 out of every 1,000 people are victim of human trafficking, right? I don't have the 1 out of every, however many, there's how many, 20 million people in the country or in the world.
1 in 10 are addicted. But we know that the majority of our victims of trafficking are also substance abusers. And the question is, how many have sat in front of us in our treatment centers, in our private practice offices, in our interventions, and had both, and we've missed it, and we've not seen it, and we've not addressed it. And I think we'd be remiss to not think that we haven't.
I was a primary therapist at a residential substance abuse facility for 9 years. It's horrifying to me to think that not once in that 9 years of treating women with substance abuse did this topic ever come up. But it didn't.
We might say they prostituted themselves, they sold themselves for drugs, but that's about as far as we went.
It didn't go further.
And yet.
It is, the probability is absolute, right? There were women that came through my office that I worked with that have been victims of human trafficking that didn't get the treatment that they needed because we weren't talking about it. Because the light was not shown.
Right. So I'm going to ask all of you, what are you going to do to take care of yourself today? Because this is a tough topic to sit and listen to. It's hard. It stirs up a lot of emotions. It's hard to sit through a talk like this and not dissociate a little bit. So I want you to take a second and commit to yourself that you're going to do something for yourself to take care of yourself today. That you're going to be aware if you start to feel maybe a little more sensitive or a little irritable or a little spacey. In fact, if everybody could just stand up for a minute. Will you stand up? Okay, stand up. And one way, there's several things that you can do if you start to get a little dissociated. You can just take a minute and feel yourself breathe. Take a deep breath. Feel your breath come all the way down. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel the floor underneath you? Absolutely. And then take a minute And one of my favorite ways to help people get regrounded is to just take a minute, and 3 times I want you to jump as high as you can. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So thank you guys for coming to this talk. It takes a lot of courage to be here, and we appreciate all of you.
We do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions? I know we're like right at the minute. But if you have any questions, we've got business cards that we'll give you. If you want a copy of our PowerPoint, you can, we'll give you a card and you can email us for it. Susie.
Just thanks, girls. That was really
Aw.
great, very moving.
Oh,
Yeah. Are there any self-help groups around? Because I know that obviously there are a lot of people that are very damaged that are not going to be able to have access, or are there safe houses? What's
Yes.
going on in the States about, giving the general public that can't get access to you guys, for example,
Yeah.
help?
safe houses, there are organizations that are setting up care. They're getting women, they're bringing them in, they're getting them resources, they're getting them safe, they're getting them away from, they're getting them away from the predators, all of that. There are a couple of groups. There's a group called Out of the Shadows. There are a lot of different groups, and there are a lot of really good books out there. There's a lot on YouTube. So there are places where it really is gaining a lot of attention. But yeah, it's a tough topic. Yeah. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you guys.